So a little bit about what we're going to do in today's session is to look at these key takeaways that I hope you will leave here with today. So after the session, I'm hoping that you will have a better seated position at your desk and work. If you suffer from any back, shoulder pain due to sitting at a desk, then hopefully we can look at some things that will help with that. Essentially, we want to leave our working day with more energy and more vitality rather than feeling really drained. And sitting at a desk from 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 or 11 or however long it takes to get your work done does leave us feeling kind of stiff and drained a lot of the time. So there are little things we can do to help with that. Then moving on into part 2, we'll be looking more about the actual nonverbal cues which we kind of leak out to other people and how we can actually increase our physical presence and impact, especially in meetings, which is where most people at work are going to see you sitting down. And that can be on Zoom meetings like this, or in real life situations once we do eventually get back to being around a table with other people as well. So hopefully after this, you'll get better results in meetings as well. So the first thing we're going to look at is vitality. And what I want to know from you, and if anyone would like to type into the chat, 2 questions. The first is, how long have you been sitting at your desk this morning? So as we're at lunchtime now, it's probably just a few hours, but maybe some of you are really early birds. So if everyone could type in maybe just roughly ballpark how many hours they've been at their desk right now, that would be great, into the chat box there. So I'll just give you a second. Wow, someone's been 5 hours already. That's a lot. You definitely get up earlier than me. 1 hour, 2 hours. Okay. So that's a little representative kind of sample there. But my next question is, how many times have you actually moved since you sat down? Especially Leanne there, who's been at her desk for 5 hours. I'd be interested to know, how many times have you got up from your desk in those 5 hours? Or even, you know, a couple of people said an hour or 2 hours. If you type in how many times roughly you think you've maybe got up from your desk today since you sat down. 4 times, that's pretty good. Okay, so our super desker there with 5 hours at the desk has got up 4 times. And we have someone who's saying, Amy has said she's got up to get water and go between meetings. So a little bit of going out to meetings is good because that means we're actually moving away from the desk. But when we don't, a lot of us, and myself included, can be terrible for sitting at our desk and just staying there. And one of the worst things we can do is not move from our desk. And I think that's really been highlighted when a lot of us have been working from home recently. You know, if you're in the office, you might go and chat to a colleague in the next office or down the hall, you might go to the water cooler, you know, but at home, it's very easy to sit down with your cup of coffee beside you and zone into work and not move for a couple of hours. And all of a sudden, especially with our home desks, maybe not being set up as well as they could be ergonomically, we find we're just like hunched like this. So I want to take you through, if you can, where you are at the moment, a few little easy desk exercises you can do that if you have been sitting at your desk for a couple of hours already, these might be good. So please do feel free to do these along with me. If you feel comfortable, you may be in an open plan office where you don't feel so comfortable with all of them, but I think some of them are subtle enough that you can do them without really drawing attention to yourself in the office. So the first one I'd recommend is just a very simple shoulder shrug up to your ears, and do that a couple of times to release out that tension in your shoulders. The next one then, and you can do that as many times as you want, but I'm not going to stay too long on anything today because we are doing a quick half hour here and we're already a little bit late starting. So the next one, some of you might be familiar with from the gym, and it's those arm stretches that we do like this. So you put your arm in front of you and then just hold your elbow in a little bit to push it towards your opposite shoulder. So you should feel that stretching across your back there, which is also really good for that shoulder tension. Now, the next 2 are arm extensions. So the first one is really to move your arms up over your head and then interlace your fingers and stretch up as high as you can. So doing this, you're not just stretching your arms, but I really want you to feel that stretch all the way up your back as well. So you should feel all those vertebrae stretching out to the full length of your back. And then the next one, if you stand up, you could do this standing up, but I'll stay sitting down for the webinar so you can see me. And is to do the same thing with interlacing your fingers, but behind your back. So you're pushing them out as far as you can behind your back, almost like popping your shirt buttons there. And the point of that is to really stretch out the front of your chest. I find personally, especially if you're using a laptop, the tendency is to hunch and type. And so as you're typing, your shoulders kind of round. So really stretching out at the back is great for that. And another thing I haven't actually got on this list, but I have to say is that I've noticed myself doing a lot is the forward head. So if you see that from the side, you'll see this is your kind of good neck position, and then your forward head is really hunching forward. If you've bad eyesight especially, you might have a tendency to do this to get a bit closer to your screen. And what my physio told me to do for this one, it's not pretty, but I do this a lot. He actually recommended you do this in the car while you're driving as well, because no one can see you. So is to actually shove your chin back into your neck and get loads of double chins going on there. And doing that a little bit just kind of releases that tension from pushing your head too far forward, because looking at screens, that is one that we are, can really damage our necks and put a lot of tension into the top of our back and the back of our neck there. So I'd really recommend the old double chin, triple chin exercise for that, looking too closely to your screen. So always try and sit up straight and keep that head way back from your screen. And if you're really struggling, it might be time for an eye test, unfortunately, because it's really worth the vanity of getting the glasses if you don't want them, to save your neck there, because it can get very sore. The next one then is a little seated back bend. So for this, we're going to just put our hands at the base of our back, kind of on our hips, and with your hands behind your back. And then just kind of use them as a lever to bend back over. So you should be sitting in your chair with your back well into the back if it's a proper effective seat for you. But just to do this little back bend over your hands, your hands are supporting your back at the back. So you're not putting any strain on it. And then it just gives you that little stretch as well. And finally, the last one is the best thing, is to stand up and move around. And a little tip I have, if you definitely don't mind drawing attention to yourself in the office, is that if you're really feeling drained, and when you've been kind of in an airless work environment, maybe there's not great natural light or air coming in, and you just have another few hours ahead of you of work to do, and you just feel so drained. We always reach for the coffee, but sometimes that's not the most helpful thing. So standing up and moving is great. And if you can, stand up, put your arms up in the air and just jump up and down, and it really gets your energy moving in your body. So you might want to run into the loo to do that one, or everyone will think you're an absolutely crazy person, but it's brilliant for just getting the energy in your body moving again. So all of these things, just to get your body moving, really help get you through the day with much more energy. So if you find that you do get sucked into work, I'd highly recommend looking at something like Pomodoro or tomat timer. Pomodoro is Italian for tomato. So it's this method where you can go onto this website or set your own timer on your phone, and every half an hour, take a little 5-minute break, even a 2-minute break, or just do some of those desk exercises. But it just keeps you conscious of, working in these little bursts and then actually giving your body a break. So it can be really effective for your concentration as well as physicality, and splitting your work into little tasks so you really focus, as opposed to switch tasking, which is a bit off topic for this webinar, but it is just really effective in a lot of ways. So I'd strongly recommend that as well. One thing I did just recommend to people, if you are still working from home, this is a little bit shutting the gate after the horse is bolted, you're probably back in the office soon, but in your home setup, try and have some natural light. If the rest of the family or people, housemates are around, see if you've got a soundproof closed door space. I would say not the dinner table, just because you have to move everything. As simple as that. If you want to eat dinner, you've got to move everything off the table. So it can be a little bit disorganized trying to constantly shift all your work around, unless you're one of those super people who have no paper and just a laptop. And also plug points is very handy too. So just that's another little consideration in your desk setup at home. But it is a luxury for some people, definitely space-wise, to have a desk. But if you do, try and set it up as ergonomically as possible. Now, ergonomics, a lot of things that can have an effect on how comfortable you are working will be your screen height. So a lot of you on Zoom calls might already be familiar with this, that you should have your camera at eye level and the top of your screen at eye level. So I have mine on a big box currently. A good chair, again, working from home, we might just have our dining table chairs or things like that. So they're not as good as an adjustable office chair that you can change the height on. So it does help with your posture, being able to adjust the chair. So cushions, a telephone book, or a big art book, if we don't have telephone books anymore these days, but a big weighty book under your computer, under your feet, even on the floor, just anything to help you get that right position. And again, that forward head, try and avoid it. So we'll just look at that position now in that right balance. So your head should be really nicely balanced, not going forward. You should have contact between yourself and the back of the seat. If your seat is too big for you, essentially, that your legs are going to be too far back, get some cushions in at your back, keep your spine supported, and then try and get your hips slightly above your knees. Now, this is harder on an at-home chair than an office chair because office chairs have that angle in them. Then we should be having our arms kind of relaxed at a right angle to the desk. And one of the worst things for our posture is actually office chairs that have arms on them, because our tendency is to put our arms on the chair arms, and they often aren't at the right height for us. So if you have one of those, try and avoid putting your arms onto them, because it can actually create a position where your body is in tension and it's staying at that position with your hands on those arms, but you'd be better off keeping your arms kind of more mobile and free. Another thing is to leave a little gap between your knees and the seat. So again, that's what I was saying, where if you sit right back into your chair and the actual base of the chair that you're sitting on is too big for you, you're not getting that gap for your knees. So you might want a little cushion at your back. And ideally, we should be keeping our feet flat on the floor and do as I say, not as I do, because I find it impossible to sit down with my feet flat on the floor. I constantly cross my legs, and I kind of try and remind myself to do it all the time, but it's very hard if you're in the habit of crossing your legs to get out of that habit, but it is better for you. And again, if you can't get your feet to the floor comfortably in that kind of right angle knee position, use a book, a big book or something under your feet to get you there if you are working from home and can't adjust your chair. So another few little things just for your office atmosphere boosters should help with your vitality. So it's really good to have plants in your office. An essential oil burner if you're at home. I don't know, some offices might not allow that, but natural light and ventilation as well, very important. Plants are great for actually releasing some oxygen. So there are a few types that are even suitable for the kind of plants you can put in your bedrooms that still release more oxygen than CO2 even at nighttime. So like aloe vera is a good one. And then you've got a handy first aid kit for burns as well, if you need it. So those are just a few little tips around kind of your office environment, vitality, and how to sit. The next part I'm going to move on to is how we can actually use the way we sit to create a little bit more kind of personal presence and impact in meetings, especially, and maybe interviews as well, or pitches, whatever it is you have to do. But I think having a bit more vitality and energy is kind of the cornerstone of that anyway. It's the foundation you're working from, because if you're tired, slumped, not feeling energetic, that comes across. Everything really shows. So if you are sitting with good energy, you've got a great start already. But then we'll move on to our kind of power moves kind of stuff. So this is all our nonverbal cues and things like that. So we've already talked a little bit about Zoom calls. So again, hopefully everyone on the call today has their screen at eye level. Obviously, with a webinar, you're just watching more than talking yourselves. But when you are talking, it's really important that people can see you well. So I'd always sit facing a light source, whether that is a window or whether it's a lamp behind your computer. But if you have a light behind you, you're going to put yourself into silhouette. So people will see this light coming from behind you, and then your face will be dark. Or if you're in a dark room, it's not ideal as well. So if you can, sit facing the window for Zoom calls. Another thing which I have tried to train myself to do, and I'll give you a little behind the scenes insight here. Doing this webinar today on my laptop camera, I have Post-its either side of it with "look here" written on them, so that I'm reminded to keep looking at the camera, because obviously our kind of natural thing to do is to look at the faces of other people that are speaking in a meeting. But when we're speaking ourselves, you do need to look at the camera, which, you know, it doesn't feel natural. You keep wanting to look at other people's faces on a Zoom call, but it is important to look at the camera so that you are speaking to people rather than speaking to your screen. The other little trick I have for Zoom calls is that the kind of distance I tend to sit would be pretty much how I would sit away from my kind of main screen when I'm working anyway. So that kind of arm's length distance. But one of the reasons Zoom calls can be so tiring for us is that we're just processing a lot of kind of nonverbal cues still through the screen. And it's much easier to do that in a room with people because we're picking up on all those little things that we pick up on. But one major thing that we pick up on in Zoom calls is if someone is very close to their camera, their head appears really large. And this can actually, to our kind of caveman brains, which haven't really evolved to catch up with modern life, seem kind of threatening. So if you are on a Zoom call and you want to maybe show a little bit more authority or have a little bit more impact, you could move a little bit closer to your screen. I'm not, let's say, recommending it, but it may come in handy in some situations. So when we go into real life meetings, whenever that will be, there are certain things that where you sit can have a really big impact on. So the power position, if you're at a rectangular table, is the head of the table. And obviously there's two ends to a table, so the more powerful position is the one that has a direct line of vision to the doorway. And you'll notice in a lot of office setups, people will have their desk with maybe, you know, if in an executive office, will have their desk with their back to the window and facing the door. And that's why it is important to turn around to that window on a Zoom call. So the boss or the CEO or the executive position in a meeting is the head of the table with a line of sight on the doorway. There is a thing in kind of the psychology of this that says where you sit determines where you stand. So in this meeting that we have the diagram of here, the person directly opposite the boss is the opponent. So that could be, I mean, it's not necessarily an aggressive opponent. It could be something like maybe a meeting where one person is selling to the other. So the people that are coming in will take the other end of the table. But it's interesting then when you have the boss who is on the right hand and left hand, I find it really fascinating. So you'll all be probably familiar with the phrase right hand man and right hand woman. But that comes from the person sitting on the right. So the person to the right of the boss or the power figure in the meeting would traditionally be, and this is like, we gravitate to these seats without even knowing it, but you might be surprised to see, oh yeah, that is how it works in my meetings. I'm thinking now where people sit and they do assume these roles. So the right hand person is an authority, it's kind of claiming your status, sitting beside the boss on the right. But it's also kind of a yes man who kind of agrees with everything the boss says. Whereas the left-hand person might be as close, they're a power position too, but they will be someone who maybe brings new ideas a bit more or doesn't necessarily agree with everything the power person in the meeting is saying. So they're a little bit more questioning. According to some kind of seating arrangements, if you're sitting in the middleman position there, it can be, depending on the setup of the table, if there are a lot of people around, you can be lost in that position. Or if you have, as we'll see in the next slide, a wider end of the table with more of a square table, it can actually be a good position. So in a very rectangular table, the middle kind of seats, you're a little bit out of the line of vision. You kind of have to turn one way or another to talk to people, to look at them. So if you really feel like you have some points to get across, I would suggest sitting somewhere that you're a little bit more visible. I'm going to move on to just the next thing then is when we do gravitate towards these seats, you know, quiet people tend to kind of sit in the quiet person spots and maybe wouldn't take up the right hand position or the power position. So it might be interesting if you have some meetings coming up to shake it up a bit and maybe put down some name cards and see if that changes the dynamic of the meeting. Because often, for instance, we'll sit beside the person that we know that we kind of get on with or we're on the same side as them. And maybe we have a difficult colleague who, if they're sitting across from you, there might be a sense of being an opponent there. So if you have something you're bringing to a meeting and you know that your difficult colleague is going to be there, if you can create a situation where you sit down beside them as opposed to across from them, they're more likely to be on your side and less likely to kind of argue the points with you. So that's another little trick I'd encourage you to try. So looking at this one here, again, it's like this kind of setup. In this slide, you have your kind of square table with more people on each side. So the power position there actually has quite a good line of view to the people who are in the middle on the sides. So the middle isn't always a bad place to be, but it does very much depend on the table. So the great people on the corners there are actually the people who are probably the quietest in the meeting and naturally gravitate towards those corners because they're out of the line of sight of the boss. They're kind of hiding away from them. So that it just means that they're going to be quieter in the meeting anyway, and the people who maybe naturally gravitate towards the more visible spots on the table will naturally get more attention. So think about that the next time you're taking your place at a table. So if you are in a meeting maybe with a potential client or a new customer or someone else, I'd really recommend trying to set it up so that you establish trust and kind of a relaxed atmosphere. One thing that's very important is equal height chairs so that no one's in, you know, a throne and everyone else is in uncomfortable stools. So you're not creating any barriers around you. Sometimes you'll see in offices, maybe someone will have a desk, but they'll also have a couple of sort of armchairs or kind of casual chairs at a coffee table to the side. That's really nice for a meeting where you just want a more comfortable kind of chat as opposed to sitting behind a desk, crossing your arms and going, well, what do you have to say to me today? You know, that's a real interview kind of situation. So a side by side is really good for a more informal chat and creating a more relaxed atmosphere. So especially if you have to kind of say something to someone that's maybe a tricky subject, you don't want to come across sitting behind your desk, giving a very authoritative kind of talk to them, addressing down. You want to have a more relaxed chat. Try and sit side by side, or even if you go into a meeting room or you book a boardroom in your office place, then you can sit, you know, side by side on a corner of a table so that one person might be at the head, but then the next person is sitting right beside them on the other corner, as opposed to across from each other, which creates just a more kind of a feeling of being an opponent as opposed to working together. So another really good thing is sitting side by side with someone. And I think if you're working on a very collaborative project, it's great to sit beside them. If you're at a board table or something, you can both look at a screen, you can work together, you can share your notes. It can be a little uncomfortable if you don't know someone too well. So if you are kind of at a first meeting stage on a work project or something with someone you haven't worked with before, I'd say go for the corner of a table and then sit one on either side of the corner. Sitting right beside someone is actually a little bit intense if you don't already know them or haven't got a good working relationship. It can be a little bit kind of lacking in personal space. And then the other thing for bigger meetings is a round table is much more collaborative than a rectangular table. So that's a good one for trying to get a group together and try and getting them all working together. You'll still have your kind of right-hand man, left-hand man, power position, wherever the most senior person or most kind of powerful, impactful person in the group sits, the people that will sit beside them will be the right-hand, left-hand people. And the person opposite could be in a sense of opponent or questioning. So the dynamics will always play out, but you can certainly create a more collaborative atmosphere. So I'd like to see if anyone notices anything in this picture, please type it into the chat, just what you see kind of happening in that meeting there, what you would or wouldn't do, and see if any of this has kind of landed with you. The first thing is that one person has placed herself in a higher position to the others, which is effectively trying to raise her authority there. And it's not even a seat, it's a window she's sitting on. So she's really really trying to kind of assert that authority. So if she's kind of trying to lead the group, it's kind of it's nice in a way because it's quite casual because she's sitting on a window. So it's not too, it's not a real seat, but she's definitely bringing herself up a little bit ahead, higher than the others. And I think the other two people, to me, don't look too comfortable. I mean, the guy is maybe leaning back a bit, which kind of indicates a little bit of, a bit too comfortable. Maybe he's not really engaging with what they're talking about. He and the other girl both have their fingers interlaced, which can be a kind of a sign of not being fully comfortable, creating a little barrier. For the guy, because he's looking a little bit too relaxed, it might be that he's opposed to the idea. For the girl, she's almost leaning forward. So she is facing into the meeting, which is good. She's engaging. She's leaning her body a little bit forward. So she's trying to engage, but her hands are clasped. So it's a very kind of prim and proper position. To me, it says maybe she's kind of a little bit nervous or trying a little bit too hard. I'm just going to check another comment here. Person in red dress seems eager to be involved. Yeah, and the guy in the purple jumper looks a bit uncomfortable. So that's exactly, you've picked up on that. The girl is looking quite eager to be involved with the leaning forward. The clasped hands indicate a nervousness almost. And yeah, the guy is kind of leaning back, which definitely is a bit maybe too comfortable for work. One thing I would always say is that looking comfortable professionally doesn't necessarily equate with being comfortable. So I wouldn't lean back casually or, you know, kind of drape yourself across the couch. It is comfortable and physically you're comfortable, but I think the comfortable that you want to portray in a work environment is a kind of a professional comfortable. So don't necessarily mix the two up. Professional comfortable is strong, confident, poised, but it could mean that you're sitting there holding in your stomach, sucking up your core muscles and trying to keep a straight back and your chin up, and you're like, this feels like a deportment lesson and I feel very rigid, but actually you are giving off a more poised and comfortable looking professional persona. So it's very much those old school deportment things of head up, straight back, shoulders back, which some of us have to train ourselves into, especially after a long day hunched over the computer. But it does give you a much more poised, comfortable look, even though you are kind of not at your most sprawled across the couch comfortable. So at the table, especially around a kind of a meeting table, I would say leave yourself maybe 6 to 8 inches so that you're not leaning too far forward like our eager friend in that picture there, because it's good to look engaged and interested in the discussion, but you don't want to look over eager because then you're not looking confident. So you might come across as looking nervous as opposed to engaged. So just leave a little gap between you and the table. Sit up straight, definitely. Lean in a bit maybe, but not too kind of hanging on every word everyone says, kind of excited, eager, leaning in. So there's a nice balance to kind of hit there. But do sit on the edge of the chair if you need to at a meeting, rather than kind of like that guy, kind of, he's leaning right back into that couch and he's just looking a bit unprofessional as he does. So always try and sit up straight. And if it means sitting on the edge of the chair, do that. And again, look out for those leaks, like the interlaced fingers are kind of a good sign there, because you know, at a boardroom meeting table or on a Zoom call, you won't see your feet, you won't see crossed legs. People will generally cross their legs in the direction of who they're kind of paying attention to. But you will see the hands. So using your hands kind of carefully, you know, giving yourself space to gesture on a Zoom call or in a meeting, giving yourself that space between you and the table is good. But also don't cross your arms because it creates a barrier. And try not to interlace your fingers because it does make you look a little bit nervous. So last thing I want to leave you with is, we always say dress for the job you want, but I always say pose for the job you are doing. And in meetings, this one is that it's remembering to move from a listening posture to a speaking posture, and often a way that we lose our power when we're speaking to other people. And you feel like you're not really, what you're saying isn't really landing with them, or they're not really listening to you. It's because of this. And it's so powerful once you understand this, is that this, like our little owl there, is what I'd call a listening posture. And I would often cock my head to one side when I'm listening to someone. But when I'm speaking, head straight. Because if you've been listening and then you start talking while you're still in a listening posture with your head, you're not taking your space and you're not taking the floor. So very important always is the old school deportment of head up straight. So that is the last thing I'm going to leave you with today, and I hope it is useful to you. These are all my contact details here. You can get in touch with me through the Speak Up Club. I've just put up the Speak Up Club social media links there, but you can also find me online, Deanna O'Connor. So if anyone wants to get in touch later via Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok even, the Speak Up Club is on that. All of the things. So thank you so much for joining us today.